everyone, welcome to episode number 28 of the Bill podcast, which is on API, and also a brand new year full of building, creating, and sharing wonderful stuff with technology. All right, so today we'll be doing on API. So what is an API? It is intended to be a protocol to interact with other software communications as well as communicate and create and display data. Now, in the web side of the API, things are really interesting as well, because as we can see from the Wikipedia page, we can be defining the API as a set of HTTP, and usually the response messages will come in terms of XML, or nowadays it's typically in JSON format, and then we can use this JSON format to display it, or sometimes even with authentication we can create this data as well. So what we'll be doing today is interacting with some of the most popular web application APIs and displaying our data. So let me first show you the project we'll be making. It is really simple. It's basically pulling in some data that I did last year, or rather the latest ones. And over here you see the picture and the name. They're coming from Facebook API. This map is coming from the Google Maps static image API. This thinking are rather tweets. So I'm just pulling in the latest tweets. These pictures are from Flickr. And then, of course, this is from Foursquare. And lastly, these are all from my GitHub. So as you can see, each of the web application has this portal exclusively for developers. For example, Facebook has that. And so is the same with Twitter, as well as Foursquare, GitHub API, as well as Flickr. And lastly, we will also go through a very simple static image Google Maps. So let's get started with that. I hope you find it very simple as well as exciting to display the data dynamically from these web applications. So firstly, let me go on to the desktop, and over here I will create an empty project folder and call it, let's say, memories. Right, so now I will get inside memories. And of course it has nothing inside. All right, so let me just open this up in Sublime Text, and I will create a new file inside here called index.html. Okay, so let me just come up with a very simple interface here, and this is where the fun will begin. The very first thing we will do here is create this little bit with Facebook API. So for that, let us first create the HTML. So under h1 tag, we will say somebody's memories of 2012. Right, and inside here, let me just add a span with a class of, let's say, name. And later on, Facebook, by interacting with the Facebook API, we will insert the data here dynamically. And of course, here I will also include image, and the class will be, let's say, pic. So next, what we will do in the same file, just for the sake of simplicity, I'll first add in jQuery, because we will be using jQuery a lot. And after this, we will add in all the scripts for JavaScript right inside here. Okay, so the very first thing we will do is try to find out how we can get that data. So if we kind of search around Facebook Open Graph API, it will give us a very beautiful website full of documentation as well as lots of examples. So Facebook Open Graph basically gives us a very easy way to query out something. So for example, they already gave us some examples here. So let's see what happens when I bring this URL just kind of into the browser as well. So let's see. So once that happened, notice here it gives us this JSON format of data. So just by accessing this URL, we can get the name, the first name, even the Facebook link, the gender, and some very minimum information. Now for APIs, the URL, recognizing the URL pattern is very important. So instead of B Taylor, if I just kind of put in my name, I will also get in my information. So see here, I get my information as well. So we're going to use this query URL and then extract in the first name. So let's see how we can do that. So I am back into my scripts file, and for a bit of object-oriented programming, I'll just create it like var and then info equals to, maybe I create a function called fetch. And this fetch function will basically take in the username. And after that, I will call in info.fetch, and of course I will pass in my name here. Right, so let's build in this fetch. The very first thing we will do is create the URL pattern. So var URL equals to, I will basically paste in the same one, but of course I will delete away the last bit, and then I will add in the username so that in case I decide to change it, it makes it a little bit more dynamic. Next, I will use this jQuery function called getJSON. And this getJSON function will pass in the URL and also another inline function. And this function will basically come in with the JSON data, right? So let's see what is happening. So all I'm going to do is just console.log, and then I'll add in JSON. So now let me open this in the browser and look what is happening. So if I open up the console, we will see that an object can be accessed here because of the console.log on line number 19. That's line number 19 right here. So let me go back and open up the object. And you will see that the information that we were getting via the URL is exactly the same here. Now this is where we can start to grab the data that we want and then use it in our web application. So for us, if you kind of realize, it will be first underscore name. So if we do json.first underscore name and refresh the page, you will see here that console logging is just my first name. So good, now that we know which exact data to pick, all I'm going to do is add it into the DOM element right here. So for that, I will add it into this span tag with class name, .name, and then .html. I will add in json.firstname. Let's come back and see what's the result. And yes, there you have it. The name is right there, and it's coming dynamically from the Facebook Open Graph API. So why don't we go ahead and do the same for the image? So if we go back to the Facebook developer documentation, there is this one for the image, the profile picture. They actually gave the link to your very own profile picture. So all I need to do is just copy it. What I'm going to do is just fetch it once, and maybe I'll create another URL. I'll just call it URL pic and put this inside inverted comma, and over here I'll delete the username, so I'll do exactly the same, plus username plus picture. So in order to test the picture, let's see what happens. So I'm going to just copy the picture and come up here and paste it. So notice what happens. It will actually give me an image. So for this, we do not have to query any JSON because this will directly give us the image. And I will go ahead and straight away add it to the source attribute of the image tag. .pic, .attribute, and I want the src attribute, and I want URL pic to be inside here. And there you go, the image is right here. So this is basically how you can manipulate Facebook. Of course, you will need some kind of authentication to get inside and manipulate the data itself, or even some private data that needs authorization from the user. So that probably warrants an episode by itself. But for now, go ahead and play with the Facebook Open Graph API. Next, it is the Google Maps static image API. So this one is pretty cool in the sense that often when you are embedding a Google Maps, it might take a lot of time. Instead of that, we can just display a static image. So let's go ahead and search for Google Maps static image API, and I will click the very first link. Once again, just like Facebook, they will have some documentation with examples and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and maybe choose the example and see how it looks like. Yep, this is the example. Open another tab in the browser and paste it in. Over here, you see there are already like queries that are sent as part of the URL. We can even change it. So let's just say Belgrade, Serbia, and immediately notice that the image changes as well just by changing the query. Next we have is the zoom. So let's just make the zoom into say 18 instead of 13. This will mean that it is zoomed much more. So you see, size is also something very nicely done here. So you can even increase the size. So instead of 800 by let's say 500, so the height kind of increases. Map type, road map, yeah, okay, I'm fine with that. Marker colors, I don't think I need any kind of marker colors, so I'm just gonna delete that, and sensor is false. So there you go. I have a static image map. So let's just put in one of the travel places that I visited last year, and that will be, let's say, Zagreb, and that's in Croatia. Right, great. And I would probably want it a little bit zoomed in, so maybe 15 and a little bit shorter. Right, so that looks kind of neat. So all I need to do is just copy this little thing. So I'll just edit it in another one, just the one below. Right, so now when I refresh it, you have the two things. So obviously I will need some kind of very basic HTML to have a break tag here. I have now the Google Maps API as well. So let me just add in a header 1 tag, I traveled to. Okay, so next let's see what API we can use, and that is the Twitter API right here. So what we'll do is we'll get in, let's say, the last 10 Twitters of a certain username, Twitter handle, and we will display it right here. So let's once again go ahead and search for it. So Twitter API tweets by user. Yeah. And when we do that, we kind of come in to a very similar page like Facebook or Google Maps. They will kind of give you some of the parameters, the resource URL, and how we can query it to get the data out. They even give you, as always, a piece of example as well, so we can use this. So let's go ahead and try it. So I'm going to use this and paste it in right here. So username, let me just say it will be my Twitter handle, and count, let's say I will, instead of 2, I'll just put in, let's say, 10. So over here you will see certain parameters like include entities. What is include entities? So we can come and look here, set to true. Each tweet will have a node. Okay, that's fine. And there is also one called include RTS. Let's see what is include RTS and include entities. Yep, that looks fine. So I'm just going to press enter and see what is there. And here you see that it is a very long JSON query. So now let me show you a little bit about one of the Chrome extensions. So I'm actually using a Chrome extension, and that is called JSON View. It is obviously enabled as a... So let me just disable a JSON View and show you how it should look. So as you can see, this is not at all very readable. So if you install this Chrome plugin JSON View and enable it, the JSON string that comes pass by will be very much prettified and easy for us to look at. Right, great. So I'm going to take this same URL string and do something very similar to what we did with Facebook. So this time I will do var tweets equals to another object, and the first object can be fetch as well with the function called handle. So you will pass in the Twitter handle, and we will initiate a variable called URL once again, and we will paste in this URL. So let's see what's going on here. API, status, username, blah, blah. All right, so instead of screen name being hard-coded, we can sort of delete it, and then we can plus the handle here. So let me just put it onto the next line. And of course, if you also want the count to be dynamic, you can also do the same. So count I can also equals to plus count. Just before the var, I will just say count equals to 10 and var URL. Let me take away this little inverted comma, and I will come down here, and this time I will do tweets.fetch, and I will put in my Twitter handle here. Just to check that everything is working, we will once again do getJSON. So .getJSON, and we will pass in URL with function, the data that will be passed back to us. And I'll just do a console.log just to see what's happening here. And over here, you will see that there will be an error. XML HTTP request cannot load. To kind of mitigate this, let me just comment out console.log. Have to add this question mark callback equals to question mark. Add in the and here. And let me go back once again and try to refresh it. You will have the 10 objects right here from the Twitter JSON. And inside the 10, each of them, this is something that we would want. So here you go, the text is something that we would want. So how do we sort of kind of manipulate it? So we will make it go through a little for loop, var I equals to 0, I less than count, because we have defined how many tweets will be inside the count, and then I plus plus, and inside each of the array element we will insert it into the HTML. So let's go ahead and create the HTML first. So h1, an unordered list called, let's say, tweets. And inside here, each of the list items will contain one tweet. So let me come back right here. We'll start with tweets and append. We'll start with list items. And if we go back to the data, we'll see that inside each of the items, we will see this thing called text. So what we want to refer to is a JSON and then the array number. So for us, it will be just I.text. So let's see how this little thing works out. All the tweets are right over here, so it's pretty simple. Next, let's go on and grab some Flickr images. So we will grab, let's say, the last 4 public photographs taken by me and uploaded to Flickr. So before we go ahead and search, let me just create the heading ul.photos. Right, so now let's search for a similar thing for Flickr. So we will do Flickr API user public photos, let's say. And here you go, we have something that looks familiar, which might be helpful for us. And just like Facebook or static image map API, we'll see that this is really very similar. They will have the parameters here, as well as some arguments. Authentication is not required. They will even tell you it's not required because we are just getting the public photos. So let's just go on and go to the API Explorer and see what it asks for. Here's how we can create the URL pattern basically. So yes, we will need the user ID, and go ahead and see what are extras. So if we kind of go back, so here you go, we will see the extras right here. So what we will definitely need are the URLs for the pictures. So I'll go ahead and grab this little extra. I'll just need one URL. So let me just go back here once again. And yes, I will need the extra per page, 4 of them, and I will just put page 1. And of course, I'll once again put in my ID here. So why don't I go ahead and change the output to JSON and see the call method once again. So now it is in JSON, and let's just make sure that we have everything. Yes, we have the title, and most importantly, we have the image as well. Right, great. So the URL is right here. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and copy them. And this time I will come back to my JavaScript section and create var and then photos and then URL, comma, the same thing. Get the data of JSON. So before I do anything, I will also kind of go ahead and paste the URL on the web browser and see, yep, it is working. So what we need to do is kind of go inside photos and then photo, and then each of them is the item that we are looking for, and under that we need to display URL_s. I will obviously have to come down here and also do photos.fetch. And then pass in the user ID. And there you go, we have the objects right here. And if you kind of go inside, we will see the image is inside URL_s. And this time we will do something very similar. We will add it to the photos. And inside each list item, we will have an image with a source. So before we do that, we obviously need to kind of have a for loop as well. So let me go ahead and add that. And we will also add in a count of, let's say, 4. So that we can refer to it here. Now I can add in a JSON.photos. Now obviously at this point it will be nicer to have a variable. And I'll just copy this right here so that it's a bit shortened. And now I can replace this entire thing by pic. Right, so let's see how that looks like. The pictures are all coming here, the latest 4 pictures, and they are all from the Flickr URL. Make them a little bit side by side, so I will add a list style will be none. And that's how we can get to play around with Flickr API. We will go through Foursquare, and what we will do is we'll try to grab in the last 5 check-in that we did through Foursquare. I'm also looking into another website by the Flickr API that also checks in by a user, and it also has a tryout button, so let's see what that gives us. And there you go, it gives us the query string along with some auth token as well. And this time I'm gonna put limit equals to 10, and then let's view that once again. Right, so I'm gonna take this, I'll do the same thing. So I visited ul.places, and very similarly I'm just going to come down here and create var places equals to an object, and just to check that everything is fine, I'll do a console.log places.fetch. And there you go, we have an object, and we have response, we have check-ins, and item. I have 10 of them, so here are all the check-ins. So let's check in one of them, and yep, there I have shout out, and this is what I would want to get. Then dot check-ins. Right, and I'm gonna console.log once again, and I'm gonna do dot items here. There you go, we have exactly the 10 objects at the first level, not so much nested anymore. Okay, so with this I will definitely create a var. Each list item I will have places and then the array index dot shout. And yep, there you go, I have all the Foursquare check-in shoutouts right over here. And finally, we will do our GitHub. So we'll do something very similar, h1, then ul, class of say repos, var repos, and inside that we will have something very similar. And of course I'll add this in limit, and let's see what the URL pattern says, and accordingly we will add in the repos here. And just like all the other web applications, beyond the thing that we want to query, there are also a lot of other ways that we can query. In GitHub you can query the issues, pull requests, repositories, and so much more, but I think we want something very simple. You list user repositories. So let me just click that, and they will give you the URL pattern. Yep, and there you have it. The JSON string is right here, and it lists all my repositories. And over here I'm gonna put in username so that I can call it. So repos.fetch, and I'm gonna call my username. Inside the URL I'll probably just pass in the username here. Right, obviously limit is not defined, but yep, here you go. I have all the 20 repositories here, but let's look inside exactly which one do we want. Now over here what we'll do is we will put the name, and then we will kind of hyperlink it. So let's look for those parameters. So if we come down here in one repository, yep, here we see the name, so that's what we want to get. And also the HTML URL, so that is HTML_URL. Now since we know the pattern of how the JSON string is received, we can manipulate it. So I will say limit is equals to JSON.length, and let's see whether we get that. So inside my append list, and here we will do JSON.html_URL, and after that we will add in JSON index I.name. Alright, so let's see how that looks like. I have all the names of my GitHub repository right here along with the URL. So just to make sure that it is properly displaying, I'll probably just add in the repos as well in the styles. And now instead of a list, it should be side by side. I'll probably just add in a margin of 20 pixel. So we have made use of a lot of web applications and their friendly APIs to build something really fun and cool here. Now definitely you will notice that every time I refresh the page there is a little bit of lag. That's because the data is coming from an external website and it is querying and so on and so forth. So if you want to build a sophisticated web application where it needs to communicate at a much higher level with a lot of users and a lot of data, you should possibly be linking it up to a database and then display it from the database instead of directly from the API. Secondly, you will notice that this is not really pretty here, what we are kind of doing with JavaScript. So you should be definitely using some kind of templating language, for example, handlebars or mustache to do that. This probably will warrant an episode by itself, so I couldn't show it. And finally, we also have to remember that if you do want to post or create an item or even access private data, some kind of authentication will be required, and that particular web application will kind of guide you. So for example, in Facebook, you have to create a Facebook app with some kind of information, and then they'll give you the instruction how to authenticate. And lastly, of course, we can create our own API and make our own front-end part of the application interact with our API for a much cleaner interface interaction. All right, so finally, that's it for this episode's project. So let me go through some more resources regarding APIs. So the very first one is actually from NetTuts, creating an API-centric web application. So this basically says why we can do that. For example, if we have an API-centric application, we can kind of cascade the information to various devices. So this is quite an article worth checking out. The next one is a beginner's guide to jQuery-based JSON API clients, and that's exactly what we did in this episode. So this is kind of a revision to what exactly I did, and you do check it out. This from Smashing Magazine. The next one is designing better JavaScript APIs. This is also probably the next step after understanding what an API is. I do hope to cover some of them in the future episode as well. Lastly, this is something fun. Now notice whenever we do an API call, all we are getting back are some information. Now another way of interacting with a web application and getting the information is through this thing called web scraping. But what is the issue with it? As it says that the owner can change the layout or some kind of implementation, and then you might not be able to get the data with web scraping, whereas it will be definitely working with an officially provided API. So do have a look at this Y Combinator forum thread as well. Also, just for fun, this guy, it was in fact just a month ago that he kind of wrote a blog post about how to do web scraping. Of course, at the end of the paragraph, he does point out that there might be legal implications. So do take note that if you do web scraping, there might be some legal issues before you do that. But if there's an official API provided, you can use that, and the data will also be very clean for us to use. And finally, there is also this web article on what is JSON and how to use it. Pretty clear. I recommend you to check this out as well. All right, so finally, for the build link of the episode, it is this video. It is video by Douglas Crockford, one of the influential people in the field of JavaScript and web development. Particularly this video, the early years, I was watching it. It's about 2 hours, but it really talks about the history of computing. He in fact started right from 17th or 18th century weaving loom technology with punch cards, and he kind of transcends about 2 or 3 centuries of computing and to how we landed onto mini computers and programming languages, and of course finally JavaScript and all the web programming languages. So do check this out. It talks about the history of computing. I enjoyed it myself very much. And it even kind of talks about why do we have delete button or backspaces on our computer? Why is something 8 byte or 160 characters? This will kind of give us a historical perspective to why certain numbers or concepts are still present today. So yep, do follow Douglas Crockford and his website as well. He's also the one to create JSON. Right, so that's it for this week's episode of Build Podcast. For all other episodes of Build Podcast, you can visit the website and subscribe through one of the 5 channels, or even go through the website and look at all the episodes. Yep, we are going towards 30 episodes. Yay. Okay, so that's it for this week, and have a great year ahead, and I will see you next week. Goodbye.